Protests across the country have shut down passenger and freight lines, blockading rail and the BC legislature, and hit the economy hard, as Indigenous protesters and those sympathetic to their cause have blockaded access in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs, who oppose an LNG pipeline crossing their traditional territory. It's all led to simmering tensions and questions about who's in charge, who speaks for the Wet'suwet'en, and what exactly is legal. Joining me now is Liberal MP Paul Lefebvre, NDP MP Leah Gazan, and Conservative Garnett Genuis here in Ottawa. Thank you for joining us. Paul, let's start with you. There's a lot of frustration with the government. People are wondering why more is not being done to clear out these protests and blockades. People are calling on the government to send the police in to clear this up. So why is it that we haven't seen the federal government taking a stronger role?
Well, I think what we've seen since the beginning of the week, certainly Minister Garnett taking the lead on this, because obviously with the issue with transportation, we actually, Minister Bennett and as well Minister Miller has made themselves available to certainly have these discussions. The only way that we're going to come to a resolution of this is through dialogue. It's certainly the federal government's role is certainly to obviously to encourage that, because at the end of the day, with respect to what the issues are going on in BC, it is a provincial matter, and certainly some of these protests across the country are also in provincial jurisdiction. That being said, this is a very serious matter. We take this matter very seriously. That's why we are obviously willing, we're ready and able to engage in conversations across with all the Indigenous communities to see how we can move forward and try to find a peaceful resolution.
Garnett, your leader was out on Friday. He was calling for the federal government to direct the RCMP to get involved, saying Indigenous protesters should check their privilege. Are you at all concerned about the precedent it sets to have the police being ordered in by politicians, or the message it sends telling Indigenous protesters that they need to check their privilege?
So, first of all, the RCMP Act is clear in terms of the Minister of Public Safety having the responsibility for giving broad direction in terms of enforcing the law. That's very important. The government is talking about talking when what we need is action. Many of the protesters involved in this are non-Indigenous, certainly not the Indigenous people directly involved in this particular project. All 20 of the band councils involved in this project are supportive. The elected representatives of all of the Indigenous peoples directly affected, as well as most of the hereditary chiefs. You have a minority of hereditary chiefs that don't like what the consensus of these communities are. We have to have the rule of law in this country. Yes, dialogue, but you can't expect unanimity. And there comes a time to act, to enforce the law. We've seen a lack of action from this government, and a very, very small number of people openly under the flag of shut down Canada have been able to effectively shut down our rail system. This is insane. This is not what a serious country should allow to happen. There's a time for conversation, for assessment. That has happened. The Indigenous people affected are overwhelmingly on side. It's time to move forward. We can't let a very small number of radical folks violently shut down Canada, and the government has a responsibility to step in a case like this.
Leah, what does the NDP think should be done about this very complicated situation?
Well, I mean, just going back on privilege, that was pretty rich from a leader who paid for his kids' private school with Canadian taxpayers. But here you have Trudeau.
It was not Canadian taxpayers. That's completely false. Completely false.
Often,
you should correct the record
Germany,
before you go on. That's completely false.
The federal government is responsible for railways, is responsible for navigable waters. He is also responsible for matters on Indigenous lands and territories. He's nowhere to be found. I feel for workers. I feel for workers that are being impacted and businesses that are being impacted. However, I think, this government, Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberal government promised to meet climate targets. Their plan will not allow us to meet climate targets. Young people from across this country are concerned about it. Are concerned about it. Yeah. I'd like a chance to finish, please, out of respect. They will not meet climate targets. This has been stated by over 90% of scientists. And young people, particularly across this country, are saying it's time that we honor fundamental Indigenous human rights. This is the message. I think it's time,
though, Leah, that they're able to stay on the tracks indefinitely and that these blockades can last indefinitely? Or is there a point where they have to be removed?
Well, I think the point is that all authorities involved need to come to the table and discuss that out. Trudeau needs to get back from Germany and be the leader he's supposed to be as the Prime Minister of Canada and sit at the table, and they need to talk this out as swiftly as possible so we can move forward in a good way that benefits all people.
Paul, the federal government...
I think what's important here... Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. What's important here is that basically this is a provincial matter. That being said, certainly in the province of British Columbia, they have been trying to find solutions. Now that they are at an impasse, that's when they've actually, yesterday, Premier Horgan and the Prime Minister Trudeau had a conversation to make sure, to say what are the next steps, how we can work together to get to a better resolution. And that is what's going on right now. So there has been a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussions and action. Basically, that means that we are working together to find solutions. What the Conservatives are proposing is basically to escalate the situation. What we are trying to do is de-escalate the situation by having those important dialogues continue.
Your approach will never allow anything to be built in this country. If you expect
and your approach and the Conservative approach is basically to escalate, call in the army, and expect a different result. That has never worked, and it will never work.
Okay, you spoke. Now it's my turn to speak. Because the time is for action right now. You have a small number of people that are holding this country hostage openly under the flag of
shutdown. So what are these actions, Garnett? What are these actions? Call in the army.
Hang on, everyone slow down for a second here so we can catch up at home. Garnett, finish your thought there and then we'll go back to Paul.
Yeah, two crucial points. First of all, this project will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by supporting the export of natural gas, which will displace coal. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions if it's able to go ahead. Number two, all of the Indigenous communities through their elected representatives to support it. Ms. Gazan should think about the right of Indigenous peoples to develop. She's concerned about a small number of protesters who represent a small minority perspective.
Informed consent and the right to say yes, no, or yes with conditions.
Let's go back to Paul and give the government a chance to respond, Garnett, because this is the government's file and the government's responsibility. Paul, people are saying that this is a sign your government has failed on reconciliation, that things have gotten to this point and there's a concern that if the police come in, things could get even worse.
And that's the case, right? So basically, listen, reconciliation is not in a moment in time. It's basically a work in progress. We need to all, as Canadians, work towards, and this will be generational. We need to keep going down that path. That being said, what the Conservatives are talking about, we need action. What action are they talking about? Do they want to call in the army? Because again, I'm not sure what Mr. Scheer was talking about, the RCMP. We have no jurisdiction over the RCMP. These are provincial matters. The only authority that we have would be to call in the army. That's the last thing that we want to do, because what they're going to do is escalate the situation. We need to de-escalate the situation, and that is coming to the table. That's why Minister Garnett, Minister Miller, Minister Bennett, they're all making themselves available to have those discussions, to be at the table, and we are engaging in this two-way dialogue that is all about reconciliation. We are going down that path.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today, so we have to wrap it up. But thank you very much for our MPs for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.